It was a quiet morning in the city, the kind of morning when the streets seemed cleaner and the air smelled faintly of coffee and rain. In one of the tallest buildings downtown, a billionaire was beginning his day, as he always did, with a sense of absolute control. His name wasn't known to most people, and he preferred it that way. He liked the luxury of silence, the hush of a world that revolved around his wealth. The house staff moved quietly around him, catering to his every need. Meals appeared on time, calls were answered before he could ask, and no one dared interrupt his routines. Downstairs, in the kitchen, the maid's daughter was already hard at work. She was not just any young woman. She had grown up in a household where careful planning, saving, and observation were part of every day. Her mother, the maid, had taught her lessons that went far beyond cleaning rooms or serving meals. She had taught her how to notice small details, how to think ahead, and how to manage money with intelligence, even if it was only a few dollars at a time. She carried that wisdom naturally without even thinking about it. On that particular morning, she was carrying a tray of freshly baked bread and fruit up to the billionaire's office. She had seen him many times before, often absorbed in his work, his eyes scanning numbers and reports with the kind of intensity that made people nervous. Yet today, there was a tension she hadn't noticed before. She didn't fully understand it, but she could sense the unease beneath his calm exterior. As she entered, he looked up briefly, his sharp eyes sizing her up, and then went back to the papers in front of him. She placed the tray on the table quietly, almost instinctively moving like she belonged in a world much bigger than hers. "Good morning," she said softly. Her voice was polite but carried a kind of confidence that surprised even herself. He didn't respond at first, too focused on the spreadsheets and financial reports that covered his desk. She watched him for a moment, noticing how tense his shoulders were, how his eyes flicked over numbers with a speed that suggested urgency, maybe even worry. She had never seen him this way before. Normally, he seemed untouchable, a man whose decisions could make or break millions in a single moment. But now there was something different, something almost human about the stress she could see in his posture. "Is everything all right?" she asked cautiously, placing her hands lightly on the edge of the desk. She wasn't sure why she asked, but something about him told her that this was not a normal day. He finally looked at her, his expression flickering between surprise and mild annoyance. "Yes, everything is fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Why do you ask?" "I just noticed you seemed a bit tense," she said carefully. "I've seen enough numbers in my life to know when someone's balance is off." He blinked, clearly caught off guard. No one ever spoke to him this way. No one ever dared notice him like this, and certainly no one had ever suggested they understood numbers well enough to make a comment. There was a pause, and in that pause, something shifted. He studied her face, as if trying to understand who she was and why she spoke with such quiet authority. "You think you understand numbers?" he asked, more amused than anything else. "I do," she said simply. "Not the kind you see on fancy papers, but the kind that matter. The kind that tell you if you're safe or if you're heading for trouble." He raised an eyebrow. "Trouble?" "Yes," she said. Her eyes didn't waver. "I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the way you're spending and investing, it's risky. Really risky. And if things continue this way, you could end up broke." For a moment, the billionaire laughed, a low, dry sound. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it carried disbelief. "Broke?" he repeated, almost mockingly. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," she said calmly. "And I also know that even the richest people can lose everything if they don't pay attention. I've seen it happen. I've watched it in smaller ways my whole life, and I've learned how to spot it early." He leaned back in his chair, studying her more closely now. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't asking for money or recognition. She wasn't flattering him. She was just stating something simple, something undeniable. And for the first time that morning, he felt a flicker of curiosity. "All right," he said finally. "Let's say I believe you. What exactly do you know about my finances?" She smiled faintly, not arrogant, but confident. "Enough to see that you're making choices that could collapse your wealth if you continue. I don't know all the details yet, but the signs are clear. I see overspending, risky loans, investments without backup plans, and a pattern that's moving too fast. Fast isn't always good. He studied her again, now fully attentive. Something about the simplicity of her words cut through the complicated reports and the endless advice he usually received from his financial team. It wasn't wrapped in jargon or complicated formulas. It was clear, honest, and practical. "You're brave," he said finally. "Most people wouldn't even notice this, let alone say it to my face." "I've never been afraid to speak the truth," she said simply. "Even if people don't like it. Even if they think I'm too young or inexperienced. The truth doesn't care about status or age." He chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "And you're just a maid's daughter." "Exactly," she said with a small smile. "I've learned from a household where every penny counts, where mistakes are noticed because they matter. You may have millions, but the principle is the same. If you ignore warning signs, you can lose it all." There was silence in the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with thought. For the first time in a long time, the billionaire felt someone looking at him. Not with fear or envy, but with insight. He wondered how much he had been missing while relying on advisors who were too polite, too self-interested, or too distracted to tell him the truth. "All right," he said finally. "Let's say I listen. Where do we start?" She set the tray aside, her attention now fully on the task. "We start by looking at everything you're doing," she said. "Every investment, every purchase, every loan. We separate the risky from the safe, the necessary from the unnecessary. And we make a plan, step by step until the danger is gone." He nodded slowly. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," she said. "The tricky part is doing it. That's where most people fail. They know what's right, but they ignore it. You just need to be willing to listen." He leaned back in his chair, letting the words sink in. For years, he had relied on charts, graphs, and advisors, all telling him what he wanted to hear. No one had ever told him plainly and simply that he could fail. Not really. Not in a way that made him see it clearly. And yet, here she was, a young woman with no title, no wealth, just observation and intelligence, telling him the truth. "All right," he said finally, a hint of respect in his voice. "We'll do it your way. Show me what you see." She smiled faintly, but inside, she felt the weight of the responsibility. She knew that helping him could change everything. Not just for him, but for herself and her family. This was bigger than she imagined. This was a chance to make a real difference, to prove that insight and courage could matter more than money or status. And so, that quiet morning in the city, an unexpected partnership began. One between a billionaire on the edge of financial collapse and a young woman who had grown up understanding the value of every penny. Neither of them knew exactly where it would lead, but both felt, in that moment, that something important was beginning. Something that could change lives. The billionaire returned to his spreadsheets, this time watching her closely as she made notes, asking questions and pointing out risks. The way she looked at numbers was different from anyone he had ever known. She wasn't calculating for fame, power, or ego. She was calculating for truth, for reality, for safety. And slowly, the first seeds of trust began to grow. By the end of the morning, she had already spotted patterns he hadn't noticed, errors that could have cost millions, and unnecessary risks that had been overlooked. He was impressed, not just by her skill, but by her courage. It was rare to find someone willing to speak truth to power, and rarer still to find someone whose insight was actually correct. As she left the office that day, she felt a mix of nervousness and determination. She knew this was just the beginning. The billionaire had agreed to listen, but listening was only the first step. The real work, the planning, the correcting, the saving was yet to come. And she was ready. For the first time, she realized that intelligence, honesty, and courage could open doors in ways money never could. And for the billionaire, for the first time in a long time, he realized that wisdom could come from the most unexpected places. And so, in a quiet office in a towering building, with the hum of computers and the faint smell of fresh bread, a story began. One that neither wealth nor status could predict, one that would challenge both of them, and one that would prove that sometimes the truth comes from the most unlikely teacher. The days that followed were filled with an unusual energy in the billionaire's office. Normally, the space was quiet, almost lifeless, with only the hum of computers and the occasional phone ringing breaking the silence. But now the atmosphere was different. The young woman's presence brought a subtle tension, a sense of accountability that the billionaire had never experienced before. It wasn't easy for him. He had spent decades making decisions without anyone challenging him, without anyone questioning his choices. Yet here was someone who did both calmly, without fear or hesitation. Every morning, she arrived before the staff, carrying her notebook and a pen. It wasn't fancy, but it was precise. She had a habit of jotting down everything she noticed, every irregularity in spending, every investment that seemed dangerous, and even little patterns that could easily be overlooked. To her, no detail was too small. She had grown up learning that small mistakes often led to bigger problems, and she applied the same principle here. The billionaire watched her with fascination. At first, he found it almost amusing. The idea that a young woman, barely out of her teens, could spot financial errors that his entire team of experts had missed seemed impossible. But as she began to explain her observations, using simple language instead of complicated charts, he realized she was right. Some of his investments were far riskier than he had thought. Some expenses were unnecessary and extravagant. And some decisions, made quickly to satisfy ego or pressure, had potential to unravel months of careful work. One morning, she sat across from him at the long mahogany table, spreading out her notes. "Look at this," she said, pointing at a list of transactions. "You've been paying for services that are no longer needed. Subscriptions, memberships, even maintenance fees that don't serve any purpose. It adds up quickly. Millions are going out, and no one is noticing." He raised an eyebrow. "I assumed these were handled efficiently. My team keeps track of these things." She smiled gently. "You assume, and that's where the problem starts. Assumptions aren't facts. Facts are what prevent mistakes. And your team may be competent, but they aren't seeing the patterns you aren't noticing yourself." For the first time in a long while, he didn't have a clever response. He had to admit quietly to himself that she had a point. He leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink in. It wasn't just her observations that impressed him. It was the way she spoke them. There was no judgment, no condescension, just clarity and honesty. It was refreshing, almost shocking in its simplicity. As the day went on, she moved from one section of his finances to another. She asked questions that his advisors had never thought to ask. "Why did you invest in this project?" she inquired. "What's the backup plan if it fails? And how much are you relying on luck rather than strategy?" Her questions made him pause. He had been so confident in his decisions that he had never questioned them deeply. But now, faced with her insight, he realized that confidence without understanding could be dangerous. She wasn't attacking him. She was teaching him to see clearly. At lunch, he invited her to sit with him. It was unusual for anyone to be invited into his private space, but he wanted to hear more. As they ate quietly, she continued to point out risks and suggest alternatives. She suggested reallocating funds, slowing down certain projects, and focusing on safer, smarter investments. Her advice was practical, simple, and realistic. It didn't rely on luck or flashy ideas. It relied on careful thought and understanding of consequences. The billionaire listened carefully, jotting down notes himself. He began to realize that her insight wasn't just about money. It was about thinking differently, seeing what others overlooked, and being willing to act when something was clearly wrong. It was a lesson he had never expected to learn from a maid's daughter. Over the next few days, they began working together more closely. She would analyze data, flag potential problems, and propose solutions. Sometimes he would resist, wanting to stick to his original plans. Other times, he would try to delegate her suggestions to his advisors, only to find that they had overlooked the same issues she had pointed out. Slowly, he began to trust her judgment, relying on her not just for advice but for perspective. One afternoon, as she reviewed a particularly complex investment report, She paused and looked up. "This one is risky," she said. "You're counting on future profits that aren't guaranteed, and you're tying up funds that you might need elsewhere. If it fails, it could create a chain reaction that's hard to recover from." He frowned, leaning over the papers. "I hadn't considered that." "That's the thing," she replied. "Sometimes, the people around you are too polite to warn you. They see the risk but won't say anything because they don't want to upset you. I don't have that problem. I tell you what I see." Her honesty struck a chord with him. He realized that for years, he had surrounded himself with yes-men, people who praised his every decision and avoided uncomfortable truths. But now, with her guidance, he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in a long time. It was uncomfortable at first, but necessary. The billionaire started paying attention to details he had previously ignored. He asked questions he had never considered, double-checked figures, and even followed up on her suggestions. It was a new way of thinking for him, and it was working. Small changes began to make a difference. Expenses were trimmed, investments were adjusted, and risky ventures were reconsidered. Slowly, the pressure that had been building in his finances began to ease. Outside the office, she continued to observe quietly. She noticed habits that could lead to unnecessary losses, how some employees submitted excessive claims, how some departments overused resources, and how minor errors were often ignored until they became major problems. She didn't judge. She simply noted and proposed solutions. Her method was simple. See the problem clearly, analyze it calmly, and act decisively. One evening, as the sun set over the city, casting golden light into the office, she stayed late to review the day's findings. The billionaire watched her quietly, marveling at her dedication. She wasn't doing this for recognition, money, or praise. She was doing it because she understood the importance of careful planning and foresight. Her approach was almost instinctual, a skill honed over years of observing and learning in her own modest home. He finally spoke, breaking the silence. "I never realized how much I was overlooking. All this time, I thought I was in control, but you've shown me that I was blind to so many details." She looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "It's not about being blind," she said. "It's about seeing clearly now and taking action before it's too late. You have the resources to fix this, but only if you're willing to listen and act." He nodded slowly. "I want to listen. I want to act. And I trust your judgment." Her heart beat a little faster. She knew this was a turning point. It wasn't enough to give advice. She needed him to take responsibility for his decisions and work alongside her. And now it seemed he was ready. The next day, they started tackling the largest issues together. She highlighted the investments that were most dangerous, suggested immediate corrective actions, and created a step-by-step plan to stabilize his finances. He followed her guidance, sometimes hesitantly, sometimes with confidence, but always paying attention. Every step they took reduced risk, cut unnecessary costs, and brought a sense of order to what had once been chaotic. Over time, the billionaire began to see her not just as an advisor but as a partner. He respected her insight, her courage, and her unwavering honesty. She had no fear of telling him the truth, even when it was uncomfortable, and that was a quality he had rarely encountered. Most people wanted something from him, but she wanted nothing except to help him see clearly. One afternoon, after a long session of reviewing financial reports, he leaned back and said quietly, almost to himself, "I never thought someone like you could teach me so much." She smiled, brushing back her hair. Sometimes, the most important lessons come from unexpected places. And sometimes, the people you least expect to help you are the ones who save you from yourself. He laughed softly, a rare, genuine sound. "I suppose I've been saved more than once in my life, but never like this." The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just about money or strategy. It was about trust, respect, and the willingness to learn from someone you never thought could teach you anything. The billionaire, who had always believed his wealth made him invincible, began to understand that wisdom, honesty, and courage were more powerful than any fortune. By the end of the week, significant changes were already visible. Expenses had been reduced, risky investments reconsidered, and a clear path forward had emerged. The pressure that had been weighing on the billionaire began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but with her guidance, he felt prepared to face them. And for the maid's daughter, this was only the beginning. She had proven that her insights mattered, that her courage could make a difference, and that her voice could be heard even in a world dominated by wealth and power. She felt a sense of pride, not in money or recognition, but in knowing that she had helped someone see the truth before it was too late. As she left the office that evening, carrying her notebook filled with observations and plans, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had made a start. The billionaire was listening. He was learning, and together they were beginning a journey that could change everything. Not just his finances, but the way he saw the world, the way he saw people, and the way he saw himself. And in the quiet glow of the setting sun, as the city lights flickered to life, both of them understood one simple truth. Courage, insight, and honesty could open doors that wealth alone could never unlock. The following week began with a sense of purpose that the billionaire had not felt in years. He sat in his office, surrounded by stacks of reports, charts, and spreadsheets, but this time it felt different. Instead of confusion or anxiety, there was focus. The young woman had insisted on starting from the basics, going through every investment, every transaction, and every expense line by line. It was painstaking work, but it was necessary. She arrived early, as always, carrying her worn notebook and a sharp pencil. She had prepared a system to organize his finances, something that his own team of experts had never managed to do. Her method was simple. Identify the risks, separate what was necessary from what was wasteful, and create a step-by-step plan to correct everything. She had no fancy software, no complex algorithms, but she had clarity and logic, and that was enough. Today, we start with the biggest risks, she said as she spread her notes across the desk. We'll tackle them one by one. If we fix the foundation, everything else will be easier. He nodded, feeling a mixture of apprehension and relief. He had always prided himself on handling everything alone, trusting his instincts above all else. But now he could see that instincts were not enough. The risks were too high, the stakes too great. And yet, there was a strange comfort in knowing that someone else was willing to guide him honestly. They started with his investments. She pointed out a large project that had seemed promising at first but had been steadily draining resources. Look here, she said, tapping the page. You're relying on projected profits that are far from certain. If this fails, it could trigger a domino effect across your other investments. He leaned forward, reading the numbers more carefully than he ever had. The more he looked, the more he realized how precarious the situation was. I didn't see it this way before, he admitted. I thought the team had it covered. They didn't, she said gently. Not because they were incompetent, but because no one was looking at the bigger picture. They focused on details, not consequences. That's what I'm here for. The day went on like this, moving from one problem to the next. She highlighted unnecessary expenses, pointing out contracts that could be renegotiated and services that were no longer needed. She asked him questions he had never considered, such as why certain investments were made in the first place and what the real backup plans were if something went wrong. At first, he felt frustrated. It was uncomfortable to have his decisions questioned, to see that even his careful planning had flaws. But gradually, he began to appreciate her perspective. She didn't judge him. She didn't criticize him personally. She simply showed him the truth, and the truth was often easier to act on than to ignore. By midday, they had already identified a series of critical issues that required immediate attention. She proposed solutions, always practical and clear. We need to redistribute some funds, she explained. This investment is too risky, but these others are stable and can generate steady income. If we shift resources now, we prevent a potential crisis. He followed her instructions carefully, making notes, asking questions, and double-checking her logic. It was a collaborative effort, unlike anything he had experienced before. She was not simply advising him. She was teaching him to think differently, to see the connections between choices and consequences that he had overlooked. During a break, he looked at her with newfound respect. You have an incredible way of seeing things, he said. It's not just about numbers. You understand the story behind them. She smiled, a little embarrassed but proud. Numbers tell a story if you know how to read them, she said. I've been reading them my whole life, just in smaller ways. It's the same principle. The billionaire realized she was right. He had always focused on the surface, the flashy deals, the headlines of success. He had overlooked the deeper patterns, the quiet signs of danger that accumulated over time. She was helping him see the story behind the numbers, the invisible threads that could unravel everything if ignored. As the week progressed, they moved to other areas. She analyzed his properties, identifying maintenance issues that were costing more than necessary. She reviewed contracts with vendors and service providers, highlighting where he could negotiate better terms or eliminate redundant expenses. She even looked at his personal spending, showing him where small but repeated losses were adding up to significant amounts. At first, he was defensive. I've earned this lifestyle, he said. I shouldn't have to worry about every small detail. She shook her head gently. It's not about your lifestyle. It's about protecting it. Every small leak can become a flood if left unchecked. If you don't act now, the lifestyle you enjoy could disappear faster than you imagine. Her words struck him deeply. He had always assumed that wealth was permanent, that as long as he made money, nothing could touch him. But her insight made him realize that no fortune was safe if left unexamined, no matter how large. The thought unsettled him, but it also motivated him to pay attention, to learn, and to act. By the end of the week, they had a clear picture of the billionaire's finances. The risks were identified, the unnecessary expenses eliminated, and the high-risk investments flagged for reconsideration. She had created a step-by-step plan to stabilize his finances, reduce losses, and ensure long-term security. It was a comprehensive approach, practical and achievable, and it was all laid out in her neat handwriting, simple but precise. He looked at her, feeling a mixture of gratitude and admiration. I don't know how to thank you, he said. I've been surrounded by advisors for years, and no one has ever shown me this clearly. You don't need to thank me, she said. Just act on it. That's what matters. Over the next few days, they began implementing the plan. He followed her guidance, adjusting investments, cutting unnecessary spending, and renegotiating contracts. Slowly but surely, the pressure that had been building in his finances began to ease. He could feel a weight lifting, a sense of control returning that he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't easy. Some changes were uncomfortable, requiring him to challenge his own assumptions and admit past mistakes. Some advisors resisted, questioning her recommendations and trying to maintain the old status quo. But the billionaire had learned to trust her judgment. He knew she was right, and he knew that acting quickly was the only way to prevent disaster. One afternoon, as they reviewed progress, she pointed out a potential problem that could have gone unnoticed. If this contract isn't addressed immediately, it could cost us more than expected next month, she said. He nodded, taking notes. Let's fix it today. No delays. The efficiency with which she worked impressed him. She didn't panic or complain. She simply identified the problem, proposed a solution, and ensured it was executed. Her calmness under pressure was something he had never seen in anyone else. It reminded him that intelligence was not just about knowing facts. It was about acting decisively when it mattered most. As the sun set over the city, casting warm light through the office windows, the billionaire leaned back in his chair and reflected on the week. He had learned more about his finances and himself than he had in years. The young woman had not only shown him the risks he faced, but had taught him a new way to approach decisions, a method of clarity, honesty, and careful observation. For her part, she felt a sense of accomplishment. She had taken what she knew from her humble upbringing, the careful attention to detail, the understanding of small patterns, the ability to act with foresight, and applied it to a world she had never imagined she could influence. She was proving, not just to him but to herself, that courage and insight could matter more than wealth or status. The billionaire looked at her thoughtfully. You've done more than I ever expected, he said. You've not only identified problems, but you've given me a way forward. I've spent my life thinking I knew everything, but you've shown me I had a lot to learn. She smiled quietly. It's not about knowing everything. It's about seeing clearly and being willing to act. You have the resources to fix this, and now you have the knowledge too. It's your choice to use it. He nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time he felt in control. He had a plan, a guide, and the confidence that, with the right decisions, he could prevent disaster and even thrive. As they packed up for the day, she reminded him gently, "Remember, the key is consistency. We've made the plan, but it only works if you stick to it. One mistake now could undo everything." He agreed, a newfound respect in his voice. "I understand, and I will. I've never had anyone guide me like this before. You've changed the way I see things." Walking out of the office, she felt a quiet pride. She was no longer just an observer. She was a part of something larger, a force that could help protect someone from losing everything. It was a responsibility she did not take lightly, but it was one she embraced with determination and courage. And as the city lights flickered to life outside, she knew that the work they had started together was only the beginning. Challenges lay ahead, some bigger and more unexpected than they could imagine. But for the first time, both of them were prepared. They were a team, united by clarity, courage, and the shared goal of saving not just money, but security, stability, and the possibility of a better future. The morning began like any other, with sunlight spilling into the billionaire's office and the faint hum of the city below. He arrived earlier than usual, papers in hand, prepared to review the progress they had made. But there was a tension in the air he hadn't anticipated. A sudden piece of news had arrived overnight. A financial investment that had been considered safe had unexpectedly taken a severe downturn. The numbers were shocking, far worse than anyone had predicted, and the potential losses were enormous. The young woman, as always, was already in the office, reviewing her notes and calculations. She looked up as he entered, her expression calm but focused. She didn't flinch, even as he slammed the report on the desk, the papers rattling with the weight of the crisis. "This is bad," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Much worse than I thought. How could this happen?" She leaned over the papers, scanning the numbers quickly. "It's a sudden market shift," she said. "It's unfortunate, but it doesn't mean everything is lost. We have options. We just need to act immediately." He stared at her, a mixture of disbelief and panic in his eyes. "Options? I don't see options. Millions are at risk. Years of work could collapse in a single day." She remained calm, almost unnervingly so. "I see options because I've been preparing for this. Risk is always present. That's why we built the plan the way we did. This is a challenge, yes, but not a disaster. Not yet. And it won't be if we handle it correctly." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had faced challenges before, but nothing like this. The loss potential was immense, and his mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Yet, in the midst of his fear, there was something grounding about her presence. She was composed, methodical, and ready to act. "Where do we start?" he asked finally, his voice tight. "First, we stop any further losses," she said. "Freeze the assets tied to this investment immediately. Contact the partners and renegotiate terms. Make sure no more money is being withdrawn or spent. Second, we redistribute resources to protect what we can. Third, we prepare a backup plan in case things get worse. Each step must be taken carefully but quickly." He nodded, trying to focus. He had always relied on intuition and instincts, but now he realized that instinct alone was not enough. Her approach, structured, calm, and precise, was exactly what was needed. They worked side by side through the morning, making phone calls, reviewing contracts, and recalculating projections. The billionaire found himself amazed at how quickly she could identify the weakest points, the areas where immediate action would have the greatest impact. Her analysis was sharp, clear, and practical. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. "I don't know how you do this," he said. "I've had teams of experts, and none of them could respond this quickly or calmly. You make it seem simple." She shook her head gently. It's not simple. It's just preparation, observation, and focus. The moment we panic, we make mistakes. That's when disasters happen. I've seen it before, and I refuse to let it happen here if I can help it. Hours passed like this. The office was filled with the sound of ringing phones, the tap of keyboards, and the constant exchange of information. Yet through it all, she remained steady, guiding him through the chaos, helping him prioritize, and ensuring every decision was based on logic rather than fear. By midday, they had stabilized some of the most critical areas. Immediate losses were minimized, contracts renegotiated, and a temporary plan for recovery put in place. Still, the threat was far from over, and the billionaire felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He realized just how close he had come to losing everything, and he felt a deep gratitude for her presence. "You've saved us from immediate disaster," he said quietly, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know what would have happened without you." She looked at him with a calm seriousness. "We're not out of the woods yet. This is just the first step. If we don't continue to monitor and adjust, more problems could arise. But you've already taken the hardest step, trusting the plan and acting quickly." The billionaire nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had learned a valuable lesson. Even the most prepared and wealthy individuals are vulnerable if they fail to anticipate challenges. She was teaching him that foresight, careful planning, and courage under pressure were more important than confidence alone. The afternoon brought another twist. A partner company sent an urgent message, claiming that the downturn was more serious than anticipated. They demanded immediate action, and the potential losses were higher than anyone had realized. He felt his pulse quicken as he read the message aloud. She didn't flinch. "We anticipated this possibility," she said calmly. "Now we implement the backup plan. Divide the remaining resources, limit exposure, and communicate clearly with every partner involved. If we act quickly and decisively, we can contain this situation and protect the core of your assets." He watched her work, making decisions with a clarity and speed he had never seen in anyone before. It was both inspiring and humbling. She wasn't making guesses. She was calculating, analyzing, and executing each step with precision. Her presence reminded him that even in moments of crisis, a clear mind could turn the tide. Hours stretched into evening, the office filled with tension, but also focus. The billionaire realized how much he had underestimated the value of having someone unafraid to tell him the truth and guide him with integrity. Every action she suggested was rooted in logic and insight, not ego or self-interest. By the end of the day, the immediate threats were contained. The potential losses were minimized, contracts secured, and a recovery plan in place. The billionaire slumped in his chair, exhausted but relieved. He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her not just as an advisor, but as a protector of everything he had worked for. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said quietly. "I faced challenges before, but nothing like today. You kept me from making mistakes I might never have realized until it was too late." She shook her head. "I didn't do it alone. You acted, you followed the plan, and you trusted the process. That's what made it work. I just guided you." He realized she was right. Her guidance was invaluable, but he had to participate, to trust, and to act. He had learned that even the most brilliant advice could fail without the courage to follow it. And for the first time, he understood the power of collaboration, honesty, and foresight. As they prepared to leave the office, he paused and looked at her. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," he said. "You don't need to repay me," she said simply. "Just remember the lessons. Trust your instincts, but always verify. Plan for risk, act with courage, and never ignore the signs. That's enough." He nodded, feeling a deep sense of respect and gratitude. The crisis had been a wake-up call, and he knew that without her, the outcome could have been devastating. She had not only saved his finances, but had also taught him invaluable lessons about leadership, foresight, and trust. That night, as he reflected on the day's events, he felt a sense of humility he hadn't experienced in years. He had relied on his wealth, his power, and his experience, but it had been her courage, insight, and honesty that truly made the difference. He realized that wealth alone could not protect him from risk, and that sometimes the most valuable guidance comes from unexpected places. For the young woman, the day had been exhausting but fulfilling. She had faced a real crisis and had helped someone navigate it successfully. It was proof that careful observation, courage, and honesty could make a tangible difference, even in situations that seemed hopeless. She had earned the billionaire's trust, not through status or titles, but through skill, wisdom, and a steady determination. And as the city lights flickered on outside, she knew that this was not the end of the challenges. More obstacles would come, more risks would appear, but now they were ready. Together, they had faced a real test and emerged stronger, with a renewed sense of purpose, trust, and partnership. The crisis had revealed more than just financial danger. It had shown the billionaire that wisdom and courage could be found in the most unlikely places, and it had shown the young woman that her insights could save not just money, but stability, security, and even lives. As they left the office, the city stretched out before them, alive with possibilities. The billionaire felt a renewed sense of confidence, not in his wealth alone, but in the knowledge that he had learned to see clearly, to act decisively, and to trust those who spoke the truth. And the young woman walked beside him, knowing that together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, guided by honesty, foresight, and courage. The weeks that followed the crisis were filled with steady, careful work. The billionaire had regained control over his finances, but this time it was different. He wasn't relying on instinct alone. He wasn't letting arrogance or overconfidence dictate his decisions. Instead, he had learned to slow down, to listen, and to analyze before acting. And through it all, the young woman continued to guide him, her insight and honesty proving invaluable every single day. She arrived early every morning, as usual, carrying her notebook and her quiet determination. The office had transformed since the first day they began working together. What was once a tense, chaotic space filled with uncertainty was now organized, focused, and methodical. The billionaire noticed how much calmer he felt, even as challenges arose. He understood that this calm wasn't just a product of numbers being in order. It was the result of careful planning, constant vigilance, and the knowledge that he had someone he could trust to speak the truth without fear or hesitation. One morning, he called a meeting with his senior advisors. Normally, these meetings were filled with praise for his decisions and polite agreement with his ideas. But today it was different. He addressed them with authority, but also with humility. "We've made mistakes," he said, his voice steady. "We relied too much on assumptions and overlooked warning signs. But we've corrected course, and I want us to stay focused on transparency, accuracy, and caution moving forward." He paused, glancing at the young woman sitting beside him. "And I want to thank someone who has been instrumental in this process. Her insights, honesty, and courage have helped save not only our finances but our future. I trust her judgment completely, and I expect all of you to listen as well." The room went silent. The advisors exchanged glances, surprised. None of them had ever been publicly acknowledged like this, especially not by someone without a title, background, or wealth. The young woman remained composed, but inside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Her efforts had been noticed and respected not because of status but because of merit. Over the next few days, the billionaire and the young woman finalized the remaining parts of the financial plan. They reviewed every investment, every contract, and every expense, making sure that nothing was overlooked. Redundant projects were eliminated, risky ventures were adjusted or canceled, and resources were redistributed to ensure long-term stability. Every decision was deliberate, informed, and carefully considered. The billionaire found himself learning more than he had in decades. He realized that wealth alone was not enough to ensure security. What mattered more were insight, planning, and courage, the ability to see what others overlooked and the strength to act when necessary. He reflected on how close he had come to losing everything and felt a profound sense of gratitude toward the young woman who had guided him through the most dangerous financial period of his life. One afternoon, as they were reviewing a particularly complex contract, the billionaire paused and looked at her thoughtfully. "You've done more than I could have imagined," he said. "I've had teams of experts for years, yet none of them could prevent what nearly happened. But you did. And you did it with honesty, clarity, and courage." She smiled quietly. "I didn't do it alone. You acted, you trusted the plan, and you stayed focused. That's what made the difference. I just helped you see the path clearly." He shook his head. "No, you guided me when I was blind. You spoke the truth when everyone else would have stayed silent. That takes more courage than I can even explain." It was a moment of mutual respect, a recognition that went beyond status or wealth. She was no longer just a helper or an observer. She was a partner in his success, someone whose insight had saved him from disaster and whose wisdom would continue to guide him in the future. With the financial plan fully implemented, the billionaire's wealth stabilized and even began to grow. The risky investments that could have caused collapse were mitigated, unnecessary expenses were eliminated, and long-term strategies were set in motion. The relief he felt was immense, but what mattered more was the confidence he now had in his decision-making. He knew that with careful planning and honest guidance, he could face challenges without fear. Word of the young woman's impact began to spread quietly among the staff and advisors. Many were astonished that someone so young, with no formal training or position of power, had not only identified risks but had provided practical solutions that worked. Her courage in speaking up, her clarity in analysis, and her dedication to helping had earned respect that money alone could never buy. The billionaire decided to acknowledge her contribution in a meaningful way. He called a meeting with all senior staff and advisors. "I want everyone to understand," he began, his voice firm, "that real wisdom can come from the most unexpected places. We often overlook talent and insight because of assumptions about age, status, or background. Today, I want to honor someone who has changed the way we approach our work, someone whose guidance has saved us from potential disaster." He paused, looking at her. "Your courage, clarity, and dedication have proven invaluable. You have shown us all that insight and honesty are more powerful than status, and I am grateful beyond words. From this day forward, your voice will always be heard and respected in this office." There was a quiet applause. She remained humble, but inside, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had never sought recognition, yet this acknowledgement was meaningful. It was proof that truth, courage, and intelligence could make a real difference, even in the most unexpected circumstances. Over the next few weeks, the billionaire continued to follow her guidance, applying the lessons she had taught him. He approached decisions more thoughtfully, listened more attentively, and prioritized long-term stability over short-term gains. His advisors also adjusted their approach, recognizing the value of honest feedback and diverse perspectives. The young woman, meanwhile, continued to observe, analyze, and guide. She remained grounded, humble, and focused, never letting the recognition distract her from the work that mattered. She had proven her abilities, but more importantly, she had made a lasting impact on the billionaire's life and career. One evening, as they reviewed the final financial report, the billionaire looked at her with a sense of awe. "We've done it," he said quietly. "Everything is stable. The immediate threats are gone, and the long-term strategy is solid. I can finally see the future clearly, and I owe this to you." She smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "You did the work, too. I only helped you see clearly. The rest was your willingness to act and learn." He nodded. "Still, I've never had anyone guide me with such honesty and courage. You've not only saved my wealth, but you've changed the way I see people, decisions, and life itself. I will never forget this." The story of the billionaire and the young woman became known quietly at first, then more widely. People were inspired by the truth that insight, courage, and honesty could come from anyone, regardless of background or status. Her story encouraged others to speak up, to share their knowledge, and to act with integrity, even in environments dominated by wealth and power. For the young woman, the experience was transformative. She had proven that intelligence and courage mattered more than wealth or title. She had shown that careful observation, honesty, and dedication could change lives, save fortunes, and earn respect. And she had gained something even more valuable: the knowledge that her voice, her insight, and her courage could truly make a difference in the world. The billionaire, now more grounded and thoughtful than ever, reflected on the journey they had shared. He realized that wealth alone was fragile, but wisdom, courage, and honest guidance were enduring. He had learned that even the most powerful individuals needed perspective, honesty, and clarity to navigate life's challenges. And he had learned to trust in people based on their insight, not their status. Months later, as he looked at the financial reports and saw steady growth, he felt a sense of peace. The crisis that had once threatened to destroy everything had been overcome, not through luck or blind confidence, but through careful planning, honest guidance, and courageous action. And standing beside him was the young woman whose insight had made it all possible. In the end, the billionaire publicly acknowledged her contribution in a quiet but meaningful way, ensuring that her efforts were recognized without undermining her humility. He invited her to continue working alongside him, not as an assistant or advisor, but as a trusted partner whose voice mattered. Together, they had not only stabilized his wealth, but had created a new approach to decision-making based on honesty, clarity, and courage. They had shown that even the most challenging problems could be overcome with the right mindset, careful planning, and unwavering integrity. The young woman's courage to speak the truth, even when it seemed impossible, had saved a fortune, a future, and a life's work. And the billionaire had learned that wealth alone could never replace wisdom, insight, and the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. As the city lights shimmered in the evening sky, they both understood that this was more than a financial success story. It was a story about trust, courage, and the power of insight. It was proof that sometimes the most unlikely people could make the biggest difference, and that honesty, clarity, and determination could overcome challenges no amount of money could solve alone. And so, the billionaire and the young woman continued their partnership, stronger than ever, bound by mutual respect, shared goals, and the understanding that true success comes not from wealth alone, but from insight, courage, and the willingness to see and act on the truth.